Chapter 19 of Peggy Raymond's School Days, or Old Girls and New, by Harriet Lummis Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19 An Advertising Scheme. There was nothing gradual about the coming of spring this eventful year. One morning the girls crawled out of bed with a shiver, and buttoned their coats up to their chins when they started for school, and found it necessary to walk briskly in order to keep warm. And the very next day a furnace fire seemed an insult, and their thoughts turned to summer clothing, and ice cream sodas, and fans, and moonlight excursions. When the calendar says early spring, and the thermometer midsummer, few people have sufficient energy to do more than creep about their daily tasks, exchanging condolences with fellow sufferers. But high school seniors cannot stop for the weather. No one is ever quite so busy as a girl graduate when commencement is drawing near. Boy students have one great advantage. They do not need to worry over their commencement gowns. In the girls' high school there were a number of members of the senior class who were worrying in earnest. No girl is likely to lose weight trying to choose between two appealing fabrics or two attractive styles. But the question of paying for an elaborate dress was a formidable problem to many a senior, and to the fathers and mothers as well. For several years past the commencement gowns in the girls' high school had been steadily growing more elaborate and expensive. The simple white dresses, which once had been considered the only suitable things for such occasions, had been replaced by elaborate gowns with little about them to suggest girlishness. The daughters of the wealthy families set the pace, and the poorer girls strained every nerve to keep up, and the question of where it was all to end had become a serious one. Peggy and Priscilla had been so engrossed in their laudable scheme of coaching Victoria Wells that they had given little thought to the great question of attire till the sudden advent of warm weather, and then their springtime fancies turned in the direction of delicate crepes and filmy chiffons, and laces and ribbons, while the new fashion plates became of absorbing interest all at once. The two Friendly Terrace seniors joined a classmate on the corner one morning as they walked to school. "Well, Anna," Peggy said by way of greeting, "have you picked out your commencement dress?" The face of Anna Joyce darkened at the question. "No, I have not," she replied almost gruffly. And then she startled them by remarking, "Sometimes I almost think I won't graduate at all." "Not graduate!" Peggy and Priscilla cried in a breath. And then, recovering from the first shock, Peggy added crossly, "Why, what nonsense, Anna!" Of course Anna knew she was talking nonsense, and she accepted the rebuke meekly. "It's getting so," she said by way of self-defense, "that a poor girl can't afford to graduate from this school. Look at all the extra expenses we have this spring. And then it comes to commencement. We have to appear in a dress that costs lots more than we can afford, and is so fussy that some of us won't ever have a chance to wear it again." Amy's bright face was overcast. "But Anna, you don't have to buy that sort of dress unless you want to." "Of course not." Anna shrugged her shoulders. "If you don't mind advertising the fact that you can't afford what the other girls can. But I'd rather leave school this minute," she ended foolishly. When half a dozen seniors met at the noon recess, Peggy broached the subject that had been occupying her thoughts most of the morning. Without mentioning Anna's name, she repeated the substance of what Anna had said. "I believe our commencements are too extravagant," Peggy declared earnestly. "Last year there was a good deal of criticism on the gowns. Lots of people thought the girls were overdressed, and I'm sure half the class couldn't really afford such elaborate things. I wonder if we can start a reform." "We might make our own dresses," Eleanor Hewitt said with a laugh. Eleanor found it difficult to understand Peggy. Her penchant for trying to right what she considered wrong, her readiness to assume responsibility, her incomprehensible interest in other people's welfare appealed to Eleanor's sense of humor. She offered her suggestion merely as a joke. It did not occur to her that even Peggy Raymond would take it seriously. But Peggy, after the half-minute pause necessary for grasping the import of the recommendation, burst out enthusiastically. "Why, Eleanor, that's just the thing. We've been studying sewing all through our course, and it'll be a splendid advertisement for the department, and it'll save the dressmaker's bill, and if the girls make their own dresses, they'll naturally choose simple styles. The question is whether we can get them to try it." "I'd be willing to make mine for one," said Blanche Estabrook, just as Eleanor was opening her lips to explain that her suggestion was purely a flash of humor. Eleanor subsided with a gasp. Blanche had, as she knew, a beautiful piece of embroidered chiffon in the house, brought from Europe the previous summer and carefully put away for the commencement occasion. And Blanche, who perhaps spent money more freely than any other girl in the class, was willing to make the gown herself. Eleanor's head whirled. The offer which bewildered Eleanor was in reality due to Blanche's strong desire to reinstate herself in the good opinion of certain members of the class, her own as well as others. The collapse of Blanche's little conspiracy had been far-reaching in effect. Success always finds apologists, while there are always plenty of people to explain why failure was deserved. Blanche knew that the girl her scheme had been designed to benefit indignantly repudiated such assistance, and that there was a very general feeling among those who had lent their aid to the undertaking that it had been a great mistake from beginning to end. And she was anxious to atone for that disastrous blunder by allying herself with some movement of which her critics would be forced to approve. Peggy was always ready to meet a penitent halfway. "That'll have lots of influence, Blanche," she cried heartily. "I will make my dress too, but with me the girls might suspect that my motive was to save money, and most of them would almost as soon be thought dishonest as economical. But you're above suspicion, Blanche. That will help wonderfully." Blanche's new aspirations opened into full bloom in the sunshine of Peggy's praise. She espoused the new idea with enthusiasm. She called a meeting at the close of school to present the plan to the consideration of the class. But the attitude of the seniors was disappointing. The girls from well-to-do homes, who had been looking forward to securing an elaborate addition to their wardrobe, were opposed to the innovation, and the girls who could not afford an expensive dress were unwilling to come forward as champions of the suggestion for fear that someone would suspect their motive. Several speeches were made in favor of the return to simplicity and frugality, but these words have lost charm for the majority of young people. Even the optimistic Peggy realized that her eloquence was wasted. The meeting broke up without taking any action. "Well," said Blanche Estabrook dejectedly, "I'm afraid we can't make it work." "Not this way," Peggy agreed. "If we could only do something to make it fashionable." She stood for a moment thinking. "Do you know Miss Waterman on the Herald?" Blanche shook her head. "She's the editor of the Woman's Page. Once I won a prize in a little competition she conducted, and we've been quite good friends ever since. I've an idea she could help us out. Let's go and see her, if you haven't anything else to do." "Now?" asked Blanche eagerly. "Very well." She put on her hat with a feeling of content she would have found it difficult to analyze. As a matter of fact, her association with Peggy in this laudable enterprise was doing wonders in restoring her self-respect. Though the Herald was a daily visitor at Blanche's home, and had been ever since Blanche could remember, it was her first visit to the newspaper building. The two girls passed through the large downstairs room where the marble floor and costly furnishings spoke eloquently of prosperity, and ascended the stairs to the second story. Here the clicking of many typewriters told of the preparation of more or less savory viands which later were to be fed the hungry presses. Peggy led the way with the air of one who is sure of her destination, and Blanche followed, glancing about her curiously at the unfamiliar scene. Once Peggy paused and called her attention to a bald little man seated at a typewriter and striking the keys with the rapid, sure touch of an expert. "That's the Piketown poet," whispered Peggy, mentioning the official name of the versifier whose name was a household word in the city, even though not particularly well known outside. "I suppose he's getting his column ready for to-morrow morning." "Do you suppose he's writing a poem?" Blanche whispered back. Once only Blanche had attempted verse, in obedience to the cruelly unreasonable behest of one of her teachers of English. It had been a memorable experience, notable for much racking of the brains and searching of the dictionary, to say nothing of measuring off the meter of her lines on her fingers. Blanche looked backward, over her shoulder, at the little man at the typewriter, with a feeling of awe. It seemed to her that never before had she comprehended the meaning of genius. Miss Waterman, a businesslike, youngish woman whose fresh girlish color was a flat contradiction to her gray hair, shook hands cordially with her caller. "Why, Peggy Raymond, what good wind blew you here?" "Wait till you hear about it. Perhaps you'll think it's an ill wind. This is Miss Blanche Estabrook, the president of the senior class of the girls' high school." The three seated themselves, and Peggy, with the directness which endeared her to the hearts of busy people, explained the plan which had failed to appeal to the seniors. "And it occurred to me," said Peggy with great frankness, that if you could put something in the paper that would make the girls feel as if being your own dressmaker was the proper thing, our scheme might become popular." Miss Waterman nodded, wrinkling her forehead as she thought it out. "There's no question but that the girls up there are overdoing it in the matter of dress. Last year it was painful. The dresses were too old, too elaborate, unsuitable for the time and place." She turned her keen eyes on Blanche. "Are you the daughter of C.K. Estabrook?" "Yes," said Blanche, wondering at the irrelevant inquiry, and wondering still more when Miss Waterman nodded with every evidence of satisfaction. "We can work it out very nicely," she said. "You understand, Miss Peggy, that a newspaper is just a newspaper, not an organ of reform. We don't mind helping in a good cause, but what we print must have news value. Now, if your friend here doesn't object to having her picture in the paper." She looked inquiringly at Blanche, but it was Peggy who answered. "Why not? All the debutantes do. And if you'll give me a little idea of how you plan to have the dress made, Miss Estabrook, that will be an advantage. Our feminine readers will like to read all the details." "Dear me, I did know how exactly I wanted it made," exclaimed Blanche, blushing becomingly. "But if I'm going to make it myself, I'm afraid I'll have to choose a different style. Suppose I tell you about it when I bring my photograph." And as this was quite agreeable to Miss Waterman, they went away, feeling they had entrusted their cause to good hands. 3 days later the girls' high school was thrown into commotion by the appearance of the vivacious little article on the women's page of the Morning Herald. According to this article, some of the more public spirited and progressive of the high school seniors felt that there was a need of counteracting certain tendencies toward extravagance at the commencement season, and a number of leading girls in the class, including its president, Miss Blanche Estabrook, the beautiful and talented daughter of C.K. Estabrook, the well-known lawyer, would make their own commencement frocks. Miss Estabrook's dress was of imported embroidered chiffon, and would be made with a full skirt and the new puff sleeves. A further description of the dress followed, with Blanche's picture showing up impressively in the midst of it. The picture of Miss Hastings, the supervisor of the sewing class in the high school, was also printed, with Miss Hastings' views on the new departure. That was the opening gun in the campaign. But when a few days later Priscilla's picture appeared, along with a description of her prospective gown, there was panic among the forces of the opposition. The girls, who were planning to patronize some well-known dressmaker, some of them had even gone so far as to select a modiste, were simply not in it, as they confided to one another, not without bitterness. Public attention was centered on the seniors, who were to make their own dresses. The patrons of the Morning Herald were promised that a number of the graduates would be photographed in the new gowns, and the photographs reproduced for the benefit of the readers of the Woman's Page. By this time the reformers had accomplished what they wanted. Now if a girl chose to make her own gown, there would be no lifting of the eyebrows, nor significant inquiries as to her father's financial status. Her industry, so far from being indicative of poverty and a ground for commiseration, was distinctly the proper thing. When Victoria came back to school, some of her classmates offered her condolences because her eyes would not permit the use of a needle. Probably the most surprised member of the senior class was Eleanor Hewitt, whose jocose counsel had worked out so unexpectedly. Both Blanche and Peggy congratulated her on her bright idea, recognizing her as a worthy fellow worker in a cause they had so much at heart. Eleanor accepted all these tributes with becoming modesty. Sometimes she did not feel altogether sure whether this clever suggestion of hers had been a joke or spoken in dead earnest. End of chapter 19.